The green screen's back. The reason is we've got a new Porsche 911 model released. It's the 911 Turbo, and in this video we're going to be looking at the details, the specs and the history behind Porsche's premier forced induction 911. Now, I always like to start with the history because context is important. The Porsche 911 Turbo goes back 45 years now, and it was a car that, when it was released in 1975, propelled the 911 from the realms of plucky sports car into top-level supercar. We start with the 930, was the internal type number of the car. Think 3 litres, single turbocharged, rear-wheel drive, and a maximum power output of 260 horsepower. Again, context is good, isn't it? The top level 911 in the range at that time was the 911 Carrera, putting out 210 horsepower. The 930 Turbo lasted from 1975 all the way up to 1989. The biggest change came in 1978 when the engine was increased in capacity from 3 litres to 3.3 litres. There was an upgrade in power from 260 horsepower to 300 horsepower, and the Turbo adopted an intercooler for the first time, which is why on the back of the car there is a change from what we now call the whale tail into the T-tray, which is kind of thicker and deeper set. And the reason is because underneath that T-tray, that's where the intercooler sat. Since those heady days of the 930, Porsche has been really careful to ensure that the DNA of the 911 Turbo remains pretty much unchanged. It's the do-it-all, everyday super sports car. Think maximum power, a lavish ride, pure opulence. After the 930 Turbo came the 964 Turbo in 3.3 and then 3.6 litre form. Then the changes start coming thick and fast. The 993 Turbo was a real step change. It was the first time the 911 Turbo went four-wheel drive. It also adopted for the first time twin turbochargers rather than single turbochargers. The 996 generation Turbo brought out 2 body types, the coupe and the cab. Also, an automatic transmission was available for the first time with Tiptronic. For the 997 Turbo generation, this was the first time Porsche utilised VTG, variable turbine geometry. It's a technology that's still used on the 911 Turbo today. It essentially gives the 911 Turbo a split characteristic of having real top-end punch, but also, especially lower down the rev range, less lag. By the turn of the 997 Gen 2 Turbo, Tiptronic gearbox was gone, replaced by the double clutch PDK transmission. Again, that is still used today. Then, of course, 991. This is when the Turbo became an absolute technological tour de force, didn't it? Electric steering, rear axle steering, PDK only, the manual is gone. That push for high horsepower and a real reliance on cutting edge technology has continued into the 992 Turbo. For the 992 generation, Porsche mixed things up a little bit. They actually released the Turbo S first. Weird? Well, possibly, but the reason being is that Porsche discovered in the 991 generation, that's Gen 1 and Gen 2, more people spec'd up to the Turbo S, and as of now have released the 992 Turbo. We'll start with the performance figures. We're talking 580 horsepower and 750 Newton meters peak torque. So straight off the bat, you're getting the previous generation's Turbo S performance within the aesthetical framework of the 992, which I think looks mega, but also quite importantly as well, the efficiencies that the newer generation brings. Top speed, 198 mile an hour. It's about 7 mile an hour slower than the new Turbo S. And the 0 to 60 time is 2.7 seconds. It's 1 whole tenth slower than the Turbo S. Obviously, like many generations before, the Turbo shares the same body as the Turbo S. In 992 form, that does mean that the front track is 45mm wider, the rear track is 10mm wider as well. You've got 20-inch wheels on the front, 21-inch on the back. This is all the same as the Turbo S, don't forget. 255/35 tyres up front, 315/30 tyres at the rear. There is a slight difference with the brakes though. On the Turbo S, you'll know that the ceramic PCCBs come as standard spec. On the standard Turbo, you get cast iron discs instead. They're slightly smaller as well, 408mm on the front, 390 on the back. The ceramics, just for comparison, are 10 piston, 420mm on the front, 390 on the back. So there is a difference in size between the ceramics of the Turbo S and the cast iron of the Turbo. but there's also a real world difference as well in terms of feel, okay? The cast iron brakes have a different feel through the pedal. There's a lot more pedal travel, which I quite like, especially on a road car. The ceramics, by comparison, they're quite aggressive, okay? It doesn't take a lot of pedal travel before the calipers are clamping quite aggressively onto the discs. In terms of standard specification, well, it's super healthy on the 992 Turbo. All of this is standard. Think PASM, Porsche Active Suspension Management. Think Sport Chrono Pack as well. Think BOSE sound, as if the sound of that flat six out the back isn't enough for you. As well as a 10.9-inch touchscreen Porsche Communication Management. It's all thrown in, as is the rear axle steering, as is PDK. Quick pointer, there is no manual option. The options on the 992 Turbo is where it gets interesting, particularly if you want something different from the absolute sledgehammer Turbo S. First up, Sport Chassis is available for the first time on the 911 Turbo. Adds a little bit of focus to the ride, and also in terms of aesthetics, pulls the ride height down by 10mm. As I mentioned on the Turbo S video, feels a little bit lumpy on bumpy roads though, so it might be something you want to think about before optioning. However, an option you definitely do want is Sport Exhaust, identifiable on the rear by the twin oval tailpipes rather than the quad square-ish. Can't think what shape that is, but you know what I mean. The Sport Exhaust is optional on the Turbo S, don't forget. It's optional, obviously, on the Turbo as well at £2,100. It is an absolute must. The 992 Turbo with Sport Exhaust is the best sounding 911 Turbo for generations. Any 992 Turbo or Turbo S that doesn't come spec'd with that Porsche Sports Exhaust is missing the point. We'll look inside with the interior. The GT wheel is standard specification. It's slightly smaller than the non-GT as well. You can go for the Heritage Design Pack, which on here features corduroy seat centers. Really cool. There are two more options of interest here which are available for the first time on the 911 Turbo. They are, first of all, the Sports Package, which essentially is the Sport Design Package in terms of bumpers, so slightly revised, I think better looking over standard. Some black and carbon decorative trinkets, and also some rear lights designed by Porsche exclusive. More exciting though is the Lightweight Design Package. The Lightweight Design Package saves 30 kilos, that's £66 for our American friends, of weight from the Turbo. Really cool, okay? How does it save that 30 kilos? Well, think lightweight buckets, a deletion of rear seats, and also some trimming of that rear sound insulation. It does mean, as Porsche points out, if you spec the Sport Exhaust as well, it intensifies that 911 Turbo experience. Pricing is important, isn't it? The Coupe is priced at 134 grand in the UK, the Cabriolet at 143. For reference, that's about 20 grand in either scenario, friendlier than the Turbo S. Does that mean that the Turbo is the understudy to the Turbo S? Well, not really. As I alluded to earlier, the Turbo S just throws all the options in. There is an argument, therefore, that the Turbo could be a little bit more of the thinking man's choice. It means that your 911 Turbo experience can be personalised to taste, bringing in some options that you like and doing away with some of the options that you don't need, which of course will have a positive impact on the wallet. You do have to be careful though, okay? That £20,000 gap between the Turbo and the Turbo S can be eaten up quite quickly. For example, on the car that I spec'd, the optional ceramics come in at 7 grand, and, which is a cool thing by the way, usually centre lock wheels are only reserved for the Turbo S, but here you can spec them on the Turbo as well. If you go for the exclusive design ones here, which I like, it's 3.5 grand option. So with those two options alone, you're already half that gap between the Turbo and the Turbo S. So you do have to be clever with your choices, and that is about it. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you turn on notifications as well, okay, so you can be one of the first to see these videos as they drop. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you soon.